Paul is the guest of Professor Diogo Geraldes, who's in the School of Economics in UCD and is also involved in the Beijing programme. So today Paul is going to be talking to us about why do donors give to less effective charities. So without further ado, Paul, over to you.
Thank you. So, good afternoon. And today I'm going to present completely new work. I actually have not presented that in a seminar before. So I'm very much looking forward to see what you think about it. I'm very excited, but let's see whether I can get you to be excited about it too. And so I'm indeed from the University of Amsterdam, and there I focus with a team on two questions. So the first question that my team is working on is what drives individuals to use their resources to improve social welfare. And that can be, like I will talk about today, in the form of donations. You really give the money away. But we also study, for example, investments. Because you can invest into financial assets purely with a financial objective, or you can also take a societal objective into account. And for example, you buy a sustainable investment fund or an impact investment where you have both a financial and a social goal. Now, and in our work, we have investigated to what extent people care about that when they make investment decisions, are willing to sacrifice financial returns to invest with a positive return for society. But I'm not going to talk about that. The other part of the research in my team is where we look, okay, given now that there is a motivation of individuals to use resources to improve society, how can we use science to help individuals to improve society in the most effective way? So we are also running randomized control trials. For example, we have done one in Bangladesh. We are now setting up one in Nigeria, in which we investigate, like, okay, how much is the impact of a charitable project, and how can we increase that impact. And in a way, what I'm going to present you today bridges exactly these two research fields, because here it's about what motivates people in the first place to give money to, or to accept maybe lower financial return on an investment to have a societal goal. This is about what is the evidence behind the effectiveness of charitable projects, but then there is also the question, what drives individuals to incorporate this evidence that, for example, our lab, but also many other labs, and the Nobel Prize of 2019 went to 3 development economists. What drives individuals to take that information into account when they donate? Or maybe to not take that into account. And that's what I'm going to show you today. So this is when you ask people, like, okay, take an average charity. So this is for a large project where they measured for a whole bunch of health interventions. So this is just for one topic of charitable projects. Of course, it could be many other ones, but here we just take health interventions that have been scientifically tested. By the way, most charitable interventions are not tested, but these are the ones that are tested. And you can just rank them on the basis of least impact to most impact. And now we asked, we asked it, but this is from another study by Caviola et al. I'll show you what we find later. But they asked individuals, like, okay, what do you believe is the difference between the average healthcare intervention by a charity and the best healthcare intervention? And so, and the best means per euro donated. So you give €1 now how much, and if it's health, you can quantify this in disability-adjusted life years or quality-adjusted life years. So you say 1 healthy year, that has a certain value, and then 10 healthy years or 20 healthy years, okay. So you can rank that, and people then believe, when you ask them, that if you give to the best charity, and that does 1.5 times as much good as the average charity when you donate the same amount of money. That's the perception of a general population. Let me now show you how it rather looks in reality, and it is much more like this. So what you can see is that's actually about half of the interventions that were tested had 0 impact or negative impact. And I can tell you that for one charity that has been investigated, €1 donated destroys 200 euros for society. So it's not only that your money does not do any good, but your well-intended donation can even make the world worse off. And then what you see is so that is about half of the charities. Then you have quite a lot of charities that do a little bit good. But you see that actually the big impact really comes from only a handful of charitable projects. And this might look surprising because it's actually 100 times. So the best charitable projects are 100 times as impactful as the average. And you think, well, 100 times, it's so much. I never had a pizza that is 100 times better than the average pizza. But when you look, for example, at startup companies, this is exactly the same. We call this the power law. And the power law applies to startups in the business scene just as much as it applies to charities. So you see that more than 90% of startup companies within 2 years are bankrupt. That's this. And you see only very few, and I know that Ireland has all these big tech companies here, like Google, Amazon. Yeah, they are on this side of the bar. But with charitable projects, it's exactly the same thing, but it completely doesn't match the perception that donors have. Donors believe, yeah, I can give, and maybe one charity is a little bit better than the other one, but it doesn't matter so much which charity I choose. And that is wrong. There might be, for your emotional connection, that might be fine, but if you really think about where can I have the most impact, then ignoring the choice of which charity you give to has at least big impact on the world. Now, how does that work then? So how do you select and find charities that are here? And for that, independent charity evaluators, and I'll show you in the next slide what these evaluators are, and I'll tell a little bit about how they work. But what they basically do is they focus on 3 criteria, S&S. So it's quite easy to remember. S&S stands for, first of all, scale. And that means, is this problem that you are going to address with a charity, is that a large problem? So how many people suffer from this? Now, for example, every minute, so I will be talking for 60 minutes today, so during my presentation, 60 children will die from malaria. So this is a big scale problem. It's also largely a neglected problem, and it has even become a more neglected problem because Trump just fired 1,500 people at US aid to do international help. So everything should be about your own country. I just want to help people in the US. So in the US there's no malaria. So that means that malaria is going to be even more neglected. The Dutch government also just slashed the development aid. It should also be only the Dutch that count. So these poor children in Nigeria, in Malawi, we don't care about them anymore. So that's highly neglected. While it's super solvable. In fact, a malaria bed net, the whole cost of a net plus rolling that out, so bringing it with a truck to the parents, costs $5. And then the chance of malaria is reduced tremendously. By now we also have malaria vaccinations that are 80% effective. It's really high effectiveness rate. And it's also super cheap, few dollars. So you can see that it's a big problem, it's neglected largely, and it's solvable. So what this is about, this is not about what is deserving, and actually my whole talk will be exactly about that. So this framework is just intended to say, how do we find these charities? Then it's up to the donor to decide, okay, how much money am I going to allocate, say, to a charity here? And how much am I going to allocate to charity there? That's a decision that I cannot make, and that's up to the donor. The only thing that this framework is saying is if I want to really make a huge impact with my euro donated, then it's here. So this is effectiveness at the margin. And this is where these independent evaluators come in. So for example, for health, and this is a GiveWell. They spend 50,000 hours doing research every year. And what is extremely important when they do this evaluation, here the criteria is exactly this one, growth potential. And that means that every year again, GiveWell updates their list of recommended charities. So only if the charity in the next year can again show stunning performance, then they are recommended. But if, let's say, also for your question at the back, so let's say suddenly everybody starts to donate to malaria, yeah, the growth potential of malaria is then not big anymore because the problem is solved. So that means GiveWell will no longer recommend malaria fighting charities. They will recommend the next big problem. And so this is on a constant basis, every year this is being updated. And the other criteria are first of all effectiveness. And so this is where you look at the intervention and you see, hey, has there been scientific evidence that this intervention really works? And for example, for the charities recommended by GiveWell, for many of these interventions, there's not one study. There are, for example, 200 randomized control trials that show the significant effect in many different places. And so not only that it works in Nigeria, because it might just be that the context in Nigeria makes it a very good place to have the impact. No, it also works in Kenya and in India. So there's really a lot of evidence to back it up. Then the next step is, okay, but now we know that it works, but how much does it cost to make it work? And then the last criteria, and this is also criteria that most charities actually fail, because try to look up your favorite charity. I've done that for many of the charities I gave to. They have a lot of really good stories about everything that was great. But then if I'm trying to look what didn't work so well, and a lot doesn't work well because we know that at least half of the projects have zero impact, I barely read anything on a charity's website. But if you want to be recommended, for example, by GiveWell, you have to give full transparency. Otherwise, you are immediately eliminated from their choice set. And so these are very strict criteria that you have to satisfy before you can get a recommendation from these institutes. They are all independent, run by by scientists. Animal charity evaluators, so they evaluate animal charities. They have even a separate criteria on their website really called governance. For the other ones, it's sort of a mixture between transparency, but also a cost effectiveness, because essentially they say, yeah, if you have bad governance, you're not cost effective, because your money is just not spent in the right way. Let me say, the examples that I've been giving to you were examples on global health. And in the arena of global health, whether it's Ireland, whether it's the Netherlands, or whether it's the US, we are so rich that you will never find any charity in our rich countries that can end up here. It's simply impossible, because if we know that in the world 719 million people have to live on less than 2 euros per day, and that is 2 euros what you can buy with those 2 euros in Ireland, not what you can buy with those 2 euros in Malawi, then by definition all our top programs are going to be in developing countries. Now again, you can have as a donor also the desire, and that's the same for me, I also want to help locally. And so then I can mix my giving between local giving and the top giving. But if you purely look at, and you just assume that all lives in the world have an equal value, then by definition, you will end up in the poorest places in the world. So yeah, and they say, so this is just global health. We have climate charities, have animal charities. Now I can talk more about that if you want also later after my talk. But this is just to give you a little bit of the background. So now what we are going to test, and this is something together with Samara Cooper and Yannick Kretschmer, who are with me in the team in Amsterdam. We look now at how do donors respond to giving them this information. And what I'm going to show you is that for many donors there is a trade-off between effectiveness and between fairness. And how that works, I will show you. So what we did is we ran a donation experiment. So we recruit people online via Prolific, and these people get a chance to earn an amount of money, and that money they can either keep for themselves or they can donate that money to one of two charities. And now let me give you example number one, and this is all based on real charities and real evidence. So we also donate the money to those charities if that's what the participant decides. So here you have a setting in which we try to keep everything as constant as possible, because you might have a preference, for example, for helping people rather at home than abroad, or for the topic. Maybe one person cares more about healthcare, somebody else cares more about human rights or arts, or so there could be legitimate reasons why you care about different things. So here we say let's try to keep everything as equal as possible. So we have two charities that are US charities who help in Kenya. We also did this experiment with Americans. And then we say, okay, if you give to charity A, research, and again, this is real research, has shown that if you give 50 pence to scholarships, that will buy you 0.3 days of schooling. And if you give 50 pence for deworming, so this was, by the way, the research for which Michael Kramer, among other things, won the Nobel Prize, then you get 30 days of schooling. And now, as a participant in the study, you got an amount of money. In this case, we gave them $2.50 for a short 10-minute survey. So on Prolific, that's quite a lot of money. And people could then decide, oh, I just want to keep that whole amount next to their show-up fee, which they got anyway. Or I'm going to give money away, and then people can decide how they distribute the money between the scholarship charity and between the charity that does the deworming. So this Deworm the World charity. No? Okay, great. Yeah, so this is the setting. With deciders, people can decide. We recruit a sample, by the way, of donors. So we in Prolific, you can actually select, and we say, oh, we want everybody who has given in the past. So that already is also reflected in the sense that we find that most people donate a positive amount, but we were not so much interested in whether or not they donate. We wanted a donor sample because this is the relevant population to study when it comes to how people decide between the charities. And that's the outcome variable that we care about. And this is what we see. So we see that 36%, so 35.8 to be exact, they give everything to the most effective charity, the neglected tropical disease. But we see that an even bigger amount, so we call these ones impact donors, but 43.2%, we call them fairness donors. They split the money 50-50 between the two charities. So they give 50% to this one and 50% to this one. But it could be a specific example, so we throw another one in. Now, two health charities, Helen Keller International, Vitamin A supplementation program. Here again, 250,000 children turn blind every year because they lack vitamin A. We get that from spinach, carrots, eggs. Many children don't have that. So for €2.50, you can give these children vitamin A supplements, and the chance of blindness goes almost down to zero. So extremely cheap, extremely effective. That's what we, by the way, also explain. I say a summary of the charity, also for your question. We explain much more to participants than what is here. We also say this charity got a top recommendation, and in this case this top recommendation comes from GiveWell, the evaluator that I showed you before. Or people can give to the Food for Educational Meal program. So these are school meals, and these are not recommended by GiveWell because according to the evaluations, again, vitamin A supplementation is 100 times more effective than providing school meals. So let's see what people do now. It's basically the exact same pattern. Now we have a bit more people that give amounts in between because now we widened the possibilities and how they could slice up the amount. But you still see around the same pattern. Now 19% give everything to Helen Keller, the vitamin A program, but even more are fairness donors, 27.8. Yeah. So I'm first going to show you, to tackle your point, hey, this is not driven by the specific example that we give people. And after that, I'm going to dive into the mechanism. So let's just do one more. And that is the Green Air Task Force. They are recommended by both Giving Green and by Founders Pledge. So for climate charities, we have two evaluators. And Clean Air Task Force is already for many years recommended by both. So we thought, okay, this is a very strong basis behind it. What the Clean Air Task Force does is, for example, they played a really important role in helping Joe Biden with the Inflation Reduction Act, which created billions of funding for climate solutions. The question is how much will be left from that now, but at least a lot of those investments have been fixed for a long time, so cannot be reversed anymore, so that's the good news. Or one tree planted, and here it's like planting trees to fight climate change. That's not effective because, for one, I don't know how much you have read about this, but this is plagued by fraud. So trees are sold 4, 5, 6 times. There's a lot of fraud in terms of the comparison, like, oh yeah, we protect these trees, and then they just protect these trees, but then they cut the trees 50 meters further down the road. So this is highly problematic. While the Clean Air Task Force have demonstrated extreme impact over many years. They were founded in 1993. Okay, so again we say, yeah, this is gets the top recommendation. Planting trees is not recommended. Okay, so these are the two charities. Now, a completely different cause. We moved from education to health to climate. And now we see there is a little bit higher fraction of impact donors in this example, but we still see that quite a big group does 50-50, and a lot of donors are somewhere in between. So they give slightly more to the Clean Air Task Force than to one tree planted. And now we get into the interesting question, like what is behind this? And as the title suggested, we think it's fairness, and I'm going to show you different pieces of evidence why we think that the fact that many donors give 50-50 is driven by fairness. And we start with equality versus meritocracy, and for that we use the experiment by Almas, Kappelen and Tungelden. This was published in the Journal of Political Economy. So here you have two workers, worker A and worker B, and they perform the exact same task, these workers, but one worker gets more money than the other one, and we have two conditions. So either we give more money to the worker who was the best performing worker. So say this worker solved more problems, gets $30, and the other worker gets $0. Or we randomly determine who of the two workers gets the $30. So again, they do the same task, but we flip a coin, and this person is lucky, this person is unlucky, 30-0. We are now interested in how people think that this money should fairly be distributed. So we ask the same people that just decided that were in these figures as spectators how much money they want to redistribute from the high income worker to the low income worker. Now, and you could do any step in terms of $5. So for example, if you want to equalize the earnings, then you do 15-15. And every participant in our study did that twice. So once for the scenario where we had two workers that were based on performance, were rewarded on performance, or two workers that were rewarded for luck. And on the basis of that, we can classify these workers into types. So you can either be an egalitarian. So if you're egalitarian, you always equalize the earnings, so you always make it 15-15. If you're a meritocrat, then you give more to the best performing worker if it's about merit, but you equalize the earnings if it's luck. And if you're a libertarian, then you always leave it like it is. You just, okay, whatever, $30 to the best. And what we see, now we are going to link these types, whether you're an egalitarian, whether you're a meritocrat, to the donation decisions. And I'm always going to distinguish between two types. I'm just ignoring the rest of the data for now. And again, in our appendix, we have everything. But just to keep it simple for this presentation, I'm just going to distinguish between the impact donors. So that are the donors who give everything to the most effective charity. And the fairness donors who split exactly 50-50. And that covers about 2/3 of our data. And then I'm going to compare these two types with each other and how they think that incomes should be fairly distributed. And what you see is exactly that the fairness donors, so the ones who split the amount equally between the two charities, also are more likely to split the money equally between two workers. Whereas the meritocrats, those who reward the best performing worker, are also more likely to give all the money to the best performing charity. And the fairness donors are much less likely to do that. And you see that almost the whole data can be classified in these two types. There are very few libertarians who give everything to the best performing worker. And there are also very few people who we cannot classify based on that. Most people belong to one of these two categories. Either they find it fair that stuff is equally divided, or they find it fair that if you perform better, you should also get more money. And it exactly coincides with what people think is fair when it comes to distributing money between charities. But this is just one test, so let's do another one. So now we're going to look at the beliefs about charities. And here we ask people some survey questions on how they perceive charities. And the first one is, do you think that every charity deserves equal funding? And yeah, here again you see a big difference. Fairness donors are much more likely to say every charity deserves the same funding, whereas impact donors do not think that. Then we ask, related now to the experiment we just saw on rewarding workers that work harder, we ask, do charities that have a top recommendation, do they work harder? Now people are sort of neutral about that, but interestingly here there's no difference. So it's not the case that an impact donor believes more than a fairness donor that at these top charities people work harder. But there is one other difference, and I found this quite interesting. So fairness donors do believe that top performing charities are more lucky. So this is exactly, again, consistent with what we saw in the experiment, how people reward workers. This is also how they think about how these top performing charities function. Third test for the fairness mechanism. Here we use 4 dictator games. So in this dictator game, the participants get 4 times 100 points, and every point gives them 10 cents. But across these 4 scenarios, the value that this 10 cents has to another recipient, which they don't know, it's all anonymous, is either also 10 cents, but then in the other decisions, we either double the amount that is given to the other person, we triple the amount, or we quadruple the amount. So in the quadruple example, if you decide to give $1, then the other person receives $4. So this is, for example, in the Charnes-Rabin model. This is a preference for efficiency, how much the pie increases in this case if you give. And our hypothesis is that if you are an impact donor, then you are going to respond much stronger to this degree of efficiency. How much is the money going to be matched? Than if you are a fairness donor, then you just give no matter how much matching there is being given. And that's exactly what we see here. So we see if there is no match, then the impact donors and the fairness donors, they do not differ. They give the same amount. But you clearly see these p-values become very low, that if we doubled, tripled, or quadrupled the amount, now impact donors give significantly more. So in other words, you see here, this amount for fairness donors, yeah, it goes up slightly, but it goes up much more strongly for impact donors. Yeah, I understand your point. So the definition that we use here for the fairness donors are the 50-50 norm of Andreoni and Bernheim. So it's two people, or you can have also in the relational model of Allen Fisk equality matching. And so these are two models that we can use, the Andreoni-Bernheim 50-50 norm, or the equality matching of Allen Fisk in his relational models work. So that is just, okay, the way to divide this is equal. That's also why we had this egalitarian experiment. And this is also why we have this efficiency thing, because if you care about equally dividing, you shouldn't care so much about the efficiency. We also, and that is currently not yet in the presentation because we are refining that, but we also asked an open question on where we asked people, so what was the reason that you gave the money in the way you did? So we phrased it very neutrally. And what we discovered, and this is interesting about what do people find fair, because we had in mind before we ran the experiment, that when people think about fairness, they think about the recipients, right? I should be fair to the recipients. But it turns out that many donors with fairness have in mind that they want to be fair to the charities. So they find it fair that both charities, not the recipients, but that both charities end up with the same amount of money. So let me explain the flow. So we always ask the decision first, so how people want to donate. Then we asked immediately after that the open question, like how did you decide this? Because we particularly do not want to put people into a certain direction, and that's where people themselves, without us steering them in any way, tell us, yeah, well, I want to be fair to both charities. And then we ask these closed-end questions where I agree with you. They can always be steering in a certain way. Yeah, but it was to me really surprising that his fairness to charities, that's really something that came up a lot. We did run a test, but I have to see whether it's actually the right test now that you ask it, where we estimate the efficiency, like the moves between these, and we regress that. So we regress a profit of being a fairness donor on this slope. Yeah. So that's the right. Okay, yeah, that we did that. Yeah, but I don't have it in the. I have 8 minutes. Okay, great, let's go. Aversion to measuring effectiveness as the fourth way we try to get at this, and this is basically Phil Tedlock with Allen Fisk. They have this paper on taboo aversion, and so for example, many people might have an aversion to effectiveness in the first place, and we split that up into 3 elements. So do you think that it's morally acceptable to evaluate charities? Then you could also not like or find it not acceptable to rank charities based on these evaluations, and people might not find it fair that we give everything to the charities that come out best out of those rankings. So, yeah, on different levels, people might have a moral issue with effectiveness measures. And if, what else the charities look at or do besides, for example, the blindness, GiveWell gives a comprehensive overview of the health benefits. In fact, half of the children that are blind die within 1 year. That's also considered. I just keep it simple because I can talk about this for hours already, how all of this is being done. So this is very comprehensive. It's even so that GiveWell considers the negative side effects, because you could come in somewhere, you help, and that might also have some negative effects. And for example, with cash transfers, you give money to some people in the town and others might become jealous and steal the money. And a lot of potential negative side effects. That's all being considered into the final evaluation. Still, I agree, in the end, it's not just about the charities, it's about the final recipients. I think we make that in a way clear in our example, for example, that we really say, okay, we had 0.3 days of schooling for the children, or we have 30 days of schooling for the children. I think that makes very clear that it is about the children. Now this here, that is indeed about charities, because the evaluation is done at the charity level. It's not done at the individual level. It is rating charities, but it's rating charities on how much they help the ultimate beneficiaries. That just always goes through the charities, and people might have an aversion to simply evaluate a charity on how much people they are helping in the end. So what you see here is that in general people have a very low aversion to measuring effectiveness, even among fairness donors, even though they have a higher aversion than impact donors. But in general, people do not have a problem with measuring effectiveness. With ranking a little bit more, but the more aversion comes from deciding based on these rankings to give everything to the most effective charity. Now here is simply showing you a regression of all the mechanisms that I have showed you, but now with control variables. I will not go into that, but just to know that all of this holds when we control for a lot of things. So the last thing I want to show you is, because it's also related to a question like, yeah, there could be many other reasons than fairness that triggers people to split 50-50, and particularly attention. So it might simply also be that people do not pay attention or do not find the decisions important, and therefore they say, yeah, whatever, I just split it 50-50. So we investigate that in several different ways. So first of all, we have a couple of understanding questions. So which, if any, of the two charities did GiveWell recommend? So we ask this at the very end of the survey. So there we test, and here we call it charity A and charity B, but of course we describe that to the participants. And we can see whether people correctly remember which charity GiveWell recommended. We also see who were the recipients. So here's where the recipients come in. And were the recipients the same or were they different? And we asked people whether they were aware of the fact that it were always the same recipients or they were not aware. And this is what you see. And here, this is a very interesting result, because fairness donors are really not able to recall which charity was recommended by GiveWell. And right now we cannot distinguish, this is future research, whether this is inattention, but our hypothesis is, and we cannot prove that now, so we need to do more studies, but that this is motivated reasoning. So if you have just given not to the most effective charity, then you don't want to admit. In fact, I have other work on investor memory, so where investors remember their negative returns, their positive returns, but they forget their negative returns. It could be the same. We don't know yet, because you see on the other two, namely about the recipients, there is no difference between impact and fairness donors. And that is strange, right? Why would they remember this equally, who was the recipient, but not which charity was recommended, because that's a huge gap. So then, in terms of how much time was taken by the survey, this is the seconds, you see that fairness donors even spend more time. So it's not that they rush through, oh yeah, 50-50. No, if anything, they spend more time. And yeah, there's also no significant difference in the quality of survey responses. We have, that's in the survey methodology, there are all kinds of things you can do. For example, whether people always give the same, on these Likert scales, always give a 5, for example, to quickly rush through. We do those quality indicators, and also there is no difference. So it's really not that fairness donors simply do stupid things. That's not at all the case. It's also not that they say the decision is less important. Yeah, slightly, but it is barely significant. They find the decision a little bit more difficult, fairness donors. And yeah, they only slightly thought less about it, but still, on a scale from 1 to 7, both groups say that they thought quite a lot about the decision. So I just want to finish because the time is up, but I think this is really the way I think about donations. So you have 3 donation buckets. Now, one bucket is money for you and the family and all the people that are very close to you. Right now I actually have to give a bit more in this bucket, unfortunately. Then we have a second, that's a pot for money that you give to charities you care about. So this could be local charities, this can be museums, this can be theaters, personal involvement. And this is the third bucket, and that is what we have been talking about. And I didn't know even about this one till 2017. And this is really what I call thoughtful involvement. So here you use science to guide you where your money makes the biggest difference. And like this, people can distribute their own money and decide, okay, how much do I want to give to bucket 1, bucket 2, and to bucket 3. Thank you so much.